The planet was vast, with skies of swirling colors and mountains that reached far beyond what the human eye could comprehend. John, a soldier from Earth, stood on the cold, rocky surface of the alien world, gazing at the horizon. He had been part of the peacekeeping mission that was meant to bring about a fragile truce between humans and the alien species known as the Verdans. The Verdans were an ancient species, their empire stretching across many systems. They had fought against humans for decades, considering them weak and inferior. But now, the galaxy had changed. War was no longer an option. At least, that was what the leaders hoped for. John had been sent here as a guard for the Queen, the ruler of the Verdan Empire. Queen Varan was known for her beauty, but also for her ruthless nature. The stories told of her cold demeanor and the fire in her eyes. That terrified even the bravest warriors. But there was more to her than what the stories said. As John approached the palace, the towering spires of the Verdan stronghold loomed over him. The guards at the gates didn't look at him with suspicion. They simply allowed him to enter, their eyes locked on the ground. He had been warned that no human had ever been granted the privilege of stepping into the presence of the Queen. But here he was, walking into the heart of her kingdom. Inside the grand hall, John saw her for the first time. Queen Varan sat on her golden throne, the entire room bathed in soft, glowing light. Her skin shimmered with a shade of deep green, unlike anything he had ever seen before. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall, flowing freely as she moved. The room was silent except for the occasional rustling of the Queen's robes. She was beautiful, but there was something more in elegance that made her seem both powerful and fragile at the same time. John stood tall, his hands at his side, as he made his way toward her. The Queen's eyes, a deep violet hue, locked onto his. She didn't smile. In fact, she seemed almost curious. Human, she said, her voice calm yet firm. You're here to protect me. John nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. I've been assigned to your safety. Varan studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she spoke again. Why do you think I'm beautiful? Her voice was colder this time, almost dismissive. John blinked, surprised by the question. It wasn't a typical greeting from a queen, especially one as feared as her. But he had spent enough time around people who had power to know that they sometimes didn't care about their own appearances. They cared about respect. You are beautiful, Your Majesty, he said quietly. But beauty is not just about how someone looks. Varan raised an eyebrow. Then what is it? She asked, leaning forward ever so slightly. You think a being like me, someone who rules with power and command, is beautiful. John took a step forward, not sure if he was crossing some invisible line, but he didn't back down. Yes, he said with certainty. It's not about how you look. It's about your strength, the way you carry yourself. Your eyes, they tell a story. They show that you've been through things, that you've had to make choices no one else would understand. For the briefest moment, something flickered in Varan's eyes. Was it surprise? But it vanished just as quickly. She looked away, seemingly uninterested in what he had just said. Strength, she scoffed, her tone mocking. You think strength makes me beautiful? John remained calm. It does, Your Majesty. It's not just your appearance. It's who you are. What you've done to get where you are. That's what makes you beautiful. Varan's expression darkened. She looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. You think I'm beautiful. I'm ugly. Human, she said sharply. I'm not like the others in my court. I am not like those who stand by me, ready to worship me. They admire my power, my rule. But no one looks at me and sees beauty. They see fear. They see power. But not beauty. John was silent for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. He knew that what she said wasn't just a simple statement, it was a cry for something more. Varan had lived her life surrounded by praise for her power and strength. But perhaps no one had ever looked at her and seen the person beneath it all. I see you, John said quietly, his voice soft but steady. And I think you're beautiful. The Queen stared at him for a long time. Her eyes were like windows. And for a moment, John thought she might let herself be seen, but instead, she looked away. "You are foolish, human," she said, her tone colder now, but there was a trace of something else, something softer. Though she would never admit it. John smiled. He didn't need to say anything else. His words had already done what they needed to. Varan sat back in her throne, her expression still unreadable. But John could see the small shift in her. Something had changed. Maybe she didn't understand it yet, but her guard had slipped just a little. As the silence stretched between them, John couldn't help but wonder what had brought the queen to this point. How many had tried to see her for what she truly was? How many had seen the same strength he did and called it beauty? He didn't know. But he did know one thing: he wasn't going to back down. No matter how hard she tried to push him away, he would keep seeing her. He would keep telling her the truth. She was beautiful. The days that followed were a strange mix of duty and silence. John continued his job as a guard for Queen Varan, but their encounters grew more frequent, more personal, as if some invisible bond was being formed between them. The queen, once distant and cold, now seemed to consider his presence with a sort of curiosity. Still, she kept her emotions tightly controlled, her eyes as unreadable as before. Varan would often look out over her grand throne room, lost in thought. Her long silver hair shimmered as she moved, her body tense. The weight of her crown seemed heavier than ever. But John, ever vigilant, could see the cracks beneath her perfect exterior. One afternoon, John stood by the large windows of the palace. As he looked out into the distant fields, watching as the Verdant soldiers trained, his mind wandered back to the conversation he had had with the queen just a few days ago. He couldn't shake the way she had looked at him after he called her beautiful. She seemed so sure of herself. But then, just like that, the walls came back up. "You're still here," a soft voice said from behind him. John turned to find Varan standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "I'm not leaving any time soon, Your Majesty," John replied with a small smile. Varan didn't smile back. Instead, she walked into the room, her eyes scanning the space as though searching for something. "I've been thinking," she said after a moment. "You call me beautiful, but I don't understand why. What makes you think that? What makes you see me differently from everyone else?" John blinked. She had asked this question before, but now it seemed like she was looking for something more, something deeper. "You've asked me that before," he said carefully, "but you haven't asked why I said it. Why I see you that way." Varan looked at him, her violet eyes narrowing. "Explain, then." John took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her gaze. "You're more than just what people see. You're not just a queen, not just a ruler. I've seen how you carry yourself, how you survived. It takes more strength than most people can even imagine. You fight battles no one sees, decisions you don't want to make but must. That takes a kind of beauty, the kind that's not on the outside." For a long moment, Varan didn't say anything. She walked over to a nearby table, her fingers lightly tracing the surface, deep in thought. John waited for her to speak, but the silence stretched on, heavy and thick. Finally, she spoke. "I've never had anyone say anything like that to me before. People admire me because of my power, my rule. But no one ever looked at me like you did. No one ever called me beautiful because of my strength, my will. They look at me and see an image, something they can either fear or worship. But you," she stopped herself, shaking her head as if unsure of what she was about to say. "I don't understand," she continued, her voice soft now, almost as if speaking to herself. "All my life, I've been told that beauty comes from power, from how you control others. But you're saying that my beauty is not in the control, not in the empire I rule, but in the choices I make now, in the strength I carry within me?" John nodded. "Exactly. You don't have to hide who you are. The world has shaped you into something it wanted. But that doesn't mean you have to become what it expects. You're more than the crown you wear or the empire you command. I see the person underneath all of that. That's where your beauty lies." Varan remained silent for a moment, her eyes distant. It was clear she was processing what he had said, struggling with the words he had offered her. She had been raised to believe that her beauty came from her power, from the respect and fear she commanded. But now, John was asking her to look deeper, to see that there was something within her that no one else had ever recognized. "I don't think I've ever truly known who I am," Varan admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've only known how to rule, how to be the queen my people needed. I've always been taught that showing any weakness would make me a target. To show vulnerability is to be defeated." John's heart went out to her. "But that's not true. Your Majesty, being vulnerable doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, John saw something in her eyes that wasn't guarded. It was a mixture of confusion, hurt, and maybe even a little bit of hope. "I've spent so much time hiding behind a mask," Varan continued, "that I forgot how to be myself, how to just be Varan. Maybe I've been too focused on being the queen the galaxy expects me to be. But what if that's not enough? What if I'm not what they want me to be?" John's voice was calm, but firm. "You don't have to be what anyone else wants you to be. You only have to be who you truly are." Varan stared at him for a long time, as though searching his face for some hidden meaning. But all John saw was sincerity, and the more he looked at her, the more he realized how much she was struggling with these thoughts. "I've always known you were different," Varan said softly, almost to herself, "but I never understood. Why until now?" John shrugged slightly. "Maybe I see things differently. Maybe that's what makes us different. But it doesn't mean I'm wrong." Varan turned away, pacing slowly in the room as if trying to shake off the weight of the conversation. Her steps were deliberate, but there was a new energy to them, a change in the way she moved. The queen had always been a symbol of cold, calculated power. But now there was something more, something softer. "I don't know if I can change who I've been all these years," she muttered, stopping at the window. "But I think I want to try." John smiled gently. "That's all anyone can do. Start by being yourself." For the first time since meeting her, John saw a glimmer of something else in Varan's eyes. It wasn't just doubt anymore. There was something deeper, something more personal. And John couldn't help but feel a small, quiet hope that, maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to see herself the way he did. The days began to blur together for John, the constant hum of life in the Verdant Palace, the quiet moments shared with Queen Varan, and the long hours spent in her presence began to feel oddly familiar, despite the tension that still lingered. In the air, there was something different now. The queen, once so distant, was slowly opening up to him. Every conversation, every glance, felt like a small step towards something neither of them fully understood. John noticed the subtle changes. First, the way Varan would pause before speaking, as if considering her words more carefully. The way she didn't immediately shut down his attempts to connect. Instead, allowing herself to show more of her true self. She was still guarded, but the cracks in her walls were becoming wider. One evening, after a long day of meetings with her advisors, Varan walked into the room where John was standing guard. She looked tired, her usual regal posture a little slouched, her violet eyes not as sharp as they had been before. John had grown used to seeing her as a figure of strength, but tonight, she seemed more like a person, vulnerable in a way that made him feel protective. "You look weary." "Your Majesty," he said, his voice soft but concerned, "is everything all right?" Varan glanced at him, her expression unreadable at first. Then she sighed, her shoulders dropping as she stepped closer to the window. The evening sky outside was bathed in a soft orange light, casting shadows across the room. "I am weary," she said, her voice almost too quiet to hear. "There is so much expected of me. Every day, I am reminded of the weight of my people's expectations. They want me to be strong, to be perfect. But I don't know if I can continue to carry this burden. I feel like I'm losing myself." John stepped forward, unsure of how to comfort her. He was a soldier, not a counselor. But in that moment, he knew exactly what to say. "You're not losing yourself, Varan," he said gently, using her name for the first time. "You're just learning who you really are, and that takes time. There's no shame in that." She didn't respond immediately, but her eyes softened as she turned to face him for a moment. She just stared at him, as if she were seeing him for the first time. It wasn't the calculating gaze she had once given him, but something different, something that made John's heart skip a beat. "You see me differently," she said quietly. "Why?" John didn't hesitate. "Because I see more than just the queen in front of me. I see someone who's been through so much, someone who's had to carry the weight of an entire empire on her shoulders. But that doesn't make you less than anyone else. It makes you human. It makes you real." Varan's lips parted as if she was about to say something, but the words seemed stuck. She had never allowed herself to show such weakness, not to anyone, let alone a human. But there was something in John's eyes, something honest and unyielding that made her want to trust him, to let go of the years of guarded strength that had been her only defense. She looked away, trying to regain her composure. "I've never had anyone speak to me like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always been told that I am above the rest, that I am to be admired, feared. But no one has ever looked at me and seen me." John took another step closer, his voice firm. "I see you, the real you, the one that's been hiding under all that power, and I'm not afraid of what's inside you." Varan's heart raced, and for a moment, she felt something stirring deep within her. It was as if John's words were unlocking something long buried, something she had kept hidden for so long that even she had forgotten it existed. "I've always been so focused on power," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "On control. I thought it was the only way to protect my people. But now, I don't know if that's enough anymore." John's voice was soft but full of sincerity. "You don't have to be perfect, Varan. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your own. And you don't have to do it alone." The silence between them stretched, thick with emotion. Varan turned away, staring out at the darkening horizon. She had been so afraid of showing vulnerability, so afraid of losing her power. But now, John's presence had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. Was power the only thing that mattered? Or was there something more? John watched her for a moment, sensing the internal battle she was waging. He knew she was still unsure, still afraid to let go of the walls she had built around herself. But he also knew that, deep down, she wanted to change. She wanted to be seen for who she truly was. "I don't know how to be anything else," Varan said finally, her voice barely audible. "I've spent my whole life being the queen, the ruler. I don't know how to be just Varan." John stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. You don't have to have all the answers right now. All you have to do is be yourself. That's the only thing that matters." Varan looked up at him then, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. You really believe that?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. John nodded, his gaze steady. "Yes, I do. You're more than what your crown represents. You're more than just a ruler. You're someone who deserves to be happy, to be loved for who you are." The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with understanding, with the unspoken bond that had begun to grow between them. Varan felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile. It was small, hesitant, but it was a smile nonetheless, and for John, that smile was everything. The weeks passed, and the once cold relationship between John and Queen Varan had shifted. The walls that had separated them were beginning to crumble, piece by piece. The queen, though still a figure of great power, now allowed herself moments of vulnerability, something she had never thought possible. John, who had once only been her guard, had become her confidant, her friend, and perhaps something more. But with this newfound bond came new challenges. Varan's people began to notice the change in their queen. The whispers in the palace corridors were louder now, filled with concern, suspicion, and fear. The advisors, who had long kept their distance from the human soldier, were growing increasingly uncomfortable with his presence in the queen's inner circle. They saw him as a threat to the empire, an outsider who had somehow gained too much influence. One evening, After another long day of talks, Krellin, Varan's most trusted advisor, approached her. His expression was grim, his eyes narrowed with worry. "Your Majesty," Krellin said, bowing slightly, "the Council is growing restless. The peace you seek with the humans is unsettling for many of us. We have fought for centuries to protect our empire. We cannot let one human, one soldier change everything we have worked for." Varan sat at her desk, staring at the holographic maps of the galaxy before her. Her fingers drummed lightly on the table as she listened to Krellin's words. She had heard this argument before, many times, but now it sounded different, more pressing. "I understand your concerns, Krellin," Varan said, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "But peace is the only way forward. The galaxy cannot afford another war. We cannot afford another war." Krellin's gaze darkened, and he stepped closer to her. "And what of your people? What of the Verdans who have fought for centuries? Who have sacrificed everything to maintain this empire? You would throw that all away for the sake of peace." With the humans, Varan stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her expression hardened, her eyes flashing with the power that came from being the queen. "My people are not blind, Krellin," she said, her voice rising. "They know the cost of war, and they know the price of peace. But this," she paused, motioning to the stars outside the window, "this is something different. This is something we must strive for. But at what cost, Your Majesty?" Krellin pressed, his tone growing more insistent. "The humans are not our allies. They are not our equals. And yet, you allow one human soldier to get so close to you. You trust him. Why?" Varan's breath caught at the question. Why? Why had she trusted John? Why had she allowed him into her heart in a way that no one else had ever been allowed? She thought of the countless hours they had spent talking about the human race, about her own fears, about what it meant to rule, to lead, to be seen. She thought of his smile, of his unwavering belief in her, even when she herself had doubted everything she had ever known. "I trust him because he sees me," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He sees the person I am, not the queen I am forced to be." Krellin's eyes narrowed. He didn't understand. He couldn't. "The council will not accept this, Your Majesty," Krellin warned. "They will not stand idly by while you weaken the empire for the sake of a single human. You must choose your people or your connection to this soldier." Varan felt a pang in her chest at his words. It was the choice she had feared, the choice she had been avoiding. Her duty to her people, her duty as their queen, clashed with the feelings she had begun to develop for John. What if Krellin was right? What if her trust in John would be the undoing of everything she had worked for? She turned away, unable to meet Krellin's gaze. "I will consider what you have said," she replied, her voice distant. "But the choice is not as simple as you think." As Krellin left the room, Varan stood alone in the dim light, her mind racing. Her heart was torn between the duties she had always known and the possibility of something new, something real. She had spent so long hiding behind her crown, behind her title, that she had forgotten what it was like to be human, to feel, to trust, to care. And yet, trusting John had brought a sense of peace she had never known. He had shown her a side of herself she had buried deep, one that longed for connection, for understanding. But what would that mean for her people? What would that mean for the future of the Verdan Empire? She could feel the weight of her people's expectations pressing down on her. They wanted her to be the unyielding queen, the leader who commanded respect and fear. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she didn't want to be just a queen. She wanted to be something more. She wanted to be Varan, the person she had hidden away for so long. That night, as she lay in her bed, her thoughts turned to John. His face, calm and kind, appeared in her mind. She remembered the way he had looked at her when no one else had, the way he had smiled, as though she were more than just a queen. She remembered his words, "You're more than what your crown represents. You're more than just a ruler. You're someone who deserves to be happy, to be loved for who you are." Varan closed her eyes, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, Could she really choose to be herself? Could she really let go of the crown and the expectations that came with it? The answer was not clear, but one thing was certain: she had to decide. The path forward was not just about what was best for her people. It was about what was best for her, for the person she wanted to be. The queen took a deep breath and made a decision. She would meet with John the next day. She would tell him everything: the doubts, the fears, the choices she was facing, and together they would decide what the future would hold. The decision was made. Varan stood before the grand window of her palace once again, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The stars sparkled like diamonds in the distance, but they seemed distant and cold to her now. It felt as if the universe was watching, waiting for her to make a choice. John had always told her that she didn't have to carry the weight of the galaxy alone. But could she really trust him? Could she trust herself? The sound of footsteps behind her broke her thoughts. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. John. He had always found his way to her, like a calm in the middle of a storm. She had come to rely on him in a way that felt both strange and comforting. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "you asked for me?" Varan turned to face him. There was a storm brewing in her heart, but she knew that she could no longer keep hiding behind the mask she had worn for so long. It was time to speak the truth to herself and to him. "John," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion, "I have made a decision. I can no longer lead my people the way I have been. I can no longer live in fear of what they expect of me. I have spent too many years doing what is right according to the Empire, according to them, but I realize now that I have forgotten what it means to be me, to be Varan." John's eyes softened. He stepped closer to her, his face filled with concern, but he said nothing. He was simply there, ready to listen. "I don't want to be just a queen," she continued. "I don't want to be the ruler they think I should be. I want to be something more. I want to be someone who chooses peace, who chooses connection, who chooses love over fear. But I don't know if I can. I don't know if they will let me." Varan felt a tear slip down her cheek. It was the first time she had allowed herself to show such vulnerability in front of him. And yet, for some reason, it felt like the right thing to do. John reached out and gently wiped the tear from her face, his touch soft and comforting. "You don't have to choose alone, Varan," he said quietly. "I'm here, and I'll be here no matter what you decide. You are not weak for feeling this way. You are strong for facing it." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the weight of her words hanging in the air between them. The galaxy outside felt so far away, as if nothing else mattered in that moment but the two of them standing in the quiet of the palace. Finally, Varan spoke again, her voice trembling just slightly. "I want to make peace with the humans, with you. I want to build a future where we are allies, not enemies. But I fear my people will not accept it. They will see it as a betrayal. They don't have to understand right now." John replied, "What matters is that you are choosing to be true to yourself. That's what will lead the way." Her heart ached with the weight of the decision, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of clarity. Maybe John was right. Maybe this was the only way forward. "I will speak with the council tomorrow," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I will tell them the truth. I will tell them that I will no longer rule from a place of fear. That I choose peace with the humans. I choose peace with you." John's face lit up with a small but genuine smile. "I'm proud of you, Varan," he said. "You're stronger than you think." Varan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision begin to settle into her chest. It was scary, uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like the right choice. The next day, Varan stood before the council of her people. The room was filled with the sharp eyes of her advisors and the silent stares of her most trusted generals. They had always looked to her for guidance, for strength, but now, Varan felt a new sense of responsibility. It was no longer just about commanding power, it was about leading her people into a future they could all share. The council murmured among themselves as she stepped to the front of the room. Their faces were filled with skepticism, some even distrust. But Varan held her head high, determined to speak the truth. I stand before you today not as your queen. She began, her voice firm, but as Varan. I have spent too long leading with fear. I have spent too long listening to the expectations of others and bearing the person I truly am. But I cannot do that anymore. I cannot continue to lead you with a crown built on lies. There was a heavy silence in the room as the council listened, their eyes searching her face for any sign of weakness. I have made a choice, she continued, her voice gaining strength. I choose peace with the humans. I choose a future where we can all coexist, where we can leave behind the hatred of the past and build something better. And I will not let fear or tradition hold me back from this path. The room was dead. Silent, Varan's heart raced in her chest, but she stood her ground. She had spoken the truth. Now, it was time to see if her people would accept it. One of her most trusted generals, Varanik, stood up. His face was stern, his expression unreadable. You choose peace with them? Varanik asked, his voice low. And what of us? What of the Veridan people? Are we to abandon everything we have fought for just to appease the humans? Varan met his gaze, her eyes fierce. We are not abandoning anything. We are choosing something better. I am choosing to lead with compassion, with understanding. If you cannot follow me, then that is your choice. But this is the path I will walk. There was a long pause, and Varan feared the worst. But then, slowly, Varanik lowered his gaze and nodded. If you are willing to walk this path, your majesty, then we will follow. But know this, we will not follow blindly. Prove to us that this peace is worth the sacrifice. Varan nodded, grateful for the understanding, but the weight of the decision was still heavy. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she felt free. She felt like she could finally be herself. John was right. She didn't have to choose alone. The morning after the council meeting, the entire palace seemed to be holding its breath. Varan had made her choice. She had spoken the truth to her people, and now, there was no turning back. The weight of her decision still sat heavily on her shoulders, but something in her had shifted. For the first time in years, she felt as if she were truly herself. John, as always, was by her side, but this time, there was a sense of pride in his eyes. He knew how hard it had been for her to stand up to her people. The fear of rejection, the fear of betrayal, had nearly held her back, but she had made the right choice. And he was there to support her, no matter what came next. Varan stood in her chambers, looking out over the city below. The streets were busy with the morning hustle of the Veridan people, and the palace seemed to be alive with whispers. Some of those whispers were about her, some were about the peace she had chosen, and some were about John. She had heard the rumors. The palace was filled with gossip about the human soldier, about how he had gained so much influence in the queen's inner circle. But Varan didn't care. She had made a decision, and she was willing to see it through. As she turned away from the window, she caught sight of John standing in the doorway. His presence was always a comfort to her, but today, it felt even more significant. He had been her protector, her friend, and now, he was something more. He was her partner in this new journey, one that neither of them had ever expected to take. You look thoughtful, John said, stepping into the room. Varan smiled softly. I'm thinking about what comes next. What will my people think? Will they accept this peace? Will they follow me? John walked over to her, his eyes filled with understanding. You've already taken the hardest step, Varan. You've chosen to be true to yourself. The rest will follow. And if they don't, we'll figure it out together. His words were simple, but they carried weight. For the first time in a long time, Varan felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the galaxy alone. John had stood by her through every challenge, every doubt, and he would continue to do so. And for that, she was grateful. I've spent so long being afraid of making the wrong decision, Varan said, her voice soft, afraid of being seen as weak. But now, I'm not sure that's the right way to lead. Maybe it's time for something different. Maybe it's time to lead with my heart, not just my power. John nodded. That's exactly what makes you strong, Varan. The willingness to open your heart, to trust others. It's what makes you a leader. It's what makes you beautiful. Varan looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never allowed herself to show this kind of vulnerability, but with John, it felt natural. She didn't have to hide who she was anymore. She didn't have to be the perfect queen. She could just be Varan. I don't know what will happen next, she said quietly. I don't know if my people will accept this, but I know that I have to try. For them, for us. John took her hand, his grip warm and steady. We'll face it together. Whatever happens, we'll make it work. You don't have to do this alone. Varan felt a sense of peace wash over her at his words. She had spent so many years believing that she had to do everything on her own, that her strength had to come from within. But now, she realized that true strength came from the connections we build with others. It came from love, from trust, from standing together in the face of uncertainty. Later that day, the council gathered again. This time, Varan stood before them with a new sense of purpose. She wasn't the queen they had once known. She wasn't the ruler who commanded fear and obedience. She was someone different now, someone who had embraced peace and connection over power and control. The room was filled with the same skeptical faces, but today, Varan was not afraid. She knew that this was her moment to prove that leadership could come from the heart, that change was possible, and that peace was worth fighting for. I stand before you today not just as your queen, she began, her voice strong and steady, but as a leader who chooses a different path, a path of peace, of unity. We have lived in conflict for too long, and it has only brought us pain. But I believe there is a better way. I believe that we can build a future with the humans, not as enemies, but as allies. The council murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disbelief. But Varan pressed on, her voice unwavering. I have made my choice. I have chosen peace, and I will not let fear stand in the way of what we can achieve together. I ask you to follow me, not because I am your queen, but because I am one of you, and together we can create something better than anything we have known before. There was a long silence in the room. Varan held her breath, waiting for the response. She knew that the council might not accept her decision right away, but she also knew that this was the only way forward. Finally, Vranek, the same general, who had questioned her decision before, stood up. His expression was still serious, but there was a hint of respect in his eyes. I was wrong, he said, his voice low but clear. You have shown us something we did not see before. Perhaps we have been too focused on the past. If you believe that peace is the way forward, then we will stand by you. The other members of the council began to murmur in agreement. Varan's heart swelled with relief. But she knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, and not everyone would agree with her choices. But for the first time, she felt like she had made the right decision. John was right. She didn't have to do this alone. She had her people, and she had him. The path ahead was uncertain. But for the first time, Varan felt hopeful. She had chosen peace, chosen to be true to herself, and chosen to lead with love and compassion. And that was a choice she could be proud of.